We're going to look at Federalist 57 today. I'm going to start reading it. I hope you have your text in front of you. And by the end of this first part, I'll tell you one of my favorite parts of this Constitution. I've already said it before, but I think you will hear it again. Let me start reading this. The third charge against the House of Representatives is that it will be taken from the class of citizen which will have least sympathy with the mass of the people and be most likely to aim at an ambitious sacrifice of the many to the aggrandizement of the few. So when he starts with this is the third charge that they have against us, remember in Federalist 55 he said there are 4 charges against us, against the fact that we have only said 65 members to the House of Representatives for the first Congress are going to be enough. And our critics are saying no, that is not enough. You've got to have more members. Otherwise, you'll have oligarchy. Of all the objections which have been framed against the federal Constitution, this is perhaps the most extraordinary. Extraordinary here, in the sense of 2 centuries ago, it means wild, crazy, not the way we use it today. Whilst the objection itself is leveled against a pretended oligarchy, the principle of it strikes at the very root of the Republican government. The aim of every political constitution is, or ought to be, first to obtain for rulers men who possess most wisdom to discern and most virtue to pursue the common good of the society. And in the next place, to take those most effectual precautions for keeping them virtuous whilst they continue to hold their public trust. Notice here, he says we are going to try to find the most virtuous people, but because Publius, John Jay Hamilton, and Madison, they don't trust human beings with power. They say we have to have a mechanism in there that they stay virtuous. Because people with power, even if they're good people, they become ambitious, corrupt. And that's why he says, we're going to find virtuous people, but we're going to make sure that they stay virtuous. The elective mode of obtaining rulers is the characteristic policy of Republican government. This is not a hereditary system. You are the one who is going to elect these people. The means that relied on in this form of government for preventing their degeneracy are numerous and various. The most effectual one is such a limitation of the term of appointments as will maintain a proper responsibility to the people. So, he's saying indirectly, if the citizens of a country are not virtuous, Republican government is not going to work. If they are not responsible enough to be informed and show up and vote, Republican government is not going to work. And he'll continue, let me now ask what circumstance there is in the Constitution of the House of Representatives that violates the principle of Republican government or favors the election of the few on the ruins of the many. Let me ask whether every circumstance is not, on the contrary, strictly conformable to these principles and is scrupulously impartial to the rights and pretensions of every class and description of citizens. So we have written a constitution for you that every class of citizen can participate. Everybody can have his say. There are some limitations, of course, but when you look at 2 centuries ago, it was one of the best, it was one of the most open systems as far as people of the United States or people of the states back then being able to participate. And here he's going to challenge anti-federalists. He say, okay, you tell us which one of these things have we violated. Who are to be the electors of the federal representatives? Not the rich more than the poor, not the learned more than the ignorant, not the haughty heirs of distinguished names more than the humble sons of obscure and unpropitious fortunes. Rich and poor, learned and not so, they all can participate. The electors are to be the great body of the people of the United States. There are to be the same who exercise right in every state of electing the corresponding branch of the legislature of that state. Remember, one of the great things they did, this is 2 centuries ago, they said anybody who can vote for the election of the lower house of a state, they are qualified to vote for members of the House of Representatives of the federal government. As you saw in one of the other Federalists, he said we cannot just issue a blanket rule that would apply to 13 states. We're just going to leave it up to you. In some states, you have to have 25 acres of land to be able to vote. In some states, 50. In some states, less. He says we'll leave that up to the state. Anybody who can vote for the lower house of that state's legislature can vote for the lower house of the federal government, which is the House of Representatives. He says, what else do you want? And here's the part that I love a lot. And I've told you this before. This is what sets this Constitution apart, especially 2 centuries ago, from anything else. Who are to be the objects of popular choice? Every citizen whose merit may recommend him to the esteem and confidence of his country. So, who can run for office? Anybody who is respected by others, and no qualifications of wealth, of birth, of religious faith, or of civil profession is permitted to fetter the judgment or disappoint the inclination of the people. So, in Article 6 of this Constitution, we said you cannot have a religious faith, a test of religious testing, telling people if you are not a Protestant Christian or Catholic or this or that or Muslim, you cannot run for office. People forget how important that is. Now, as I told you a few Federalists ago, this was not true in all the states. This was not going to apply in all the states. As a matter of fact, I said a few Federalists ago that if I were to run for office and I said, oh, we're a Muslim right now, in a state like Oklahoma, most of the states of the United States, my chances will be slim. But that's not because the Constitution says I cannot run. It's because of lack of knowledge by people, prejudices, or maybe just because I won't be a good candidate. But the Constitution does not disqualify me. And that is very important. It took a century or two for us to get to where we are. But the Constitution does not disqualify anybody on the count of their faith to run for office here. And that is very important. Yes, don't be mistaken now. when you look at the state constitutions and what the religious test and property qualifications were back then, it was far, far, far from anything we would say good. But at least the fact that the federal constitution starts doing away with this religious test is a great starting point for future generations of Americans that would come after this Constitution was written over 2 centuries ago. So I hope you always have your Federalist Papers either on the screen, reading it along with me, or reading it in a book. But if you haven't read it at least once, I highly recommend that you read along with me, because by listening to it, it's not going to make too much sense. Also, remember that you have to read the whole thing for it to make sense, because I'm explaining a little bit here, a little bit there, and just gradually, like a little work of puzzle, we put it together. So, hang in there and try to go through the whole thing. Thank you.